As the Elbaf flashback unfolds, pieces by pieces, we are receiving new information that recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about this fabled legendary kingdom, and most importantly, everything we thought we knew about Loki, the infamous accursed prince who was prophesied to kill his own father from birth. In reality, a misunderstood boy seeking love and connection. A lonely prince who, despite his treatment, still seeks to protect his kingdom, to protect his family. Well, I'm doubling down on my claims that Loki is innocent, and that everything he did for the sake of Elbaf. And it all happens to center around a legendary devil fruit. But before we begin, please take a quick second to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate your help in getting to 100,000 subscribers, and in return, I'll make sure you never run out of One Piece content. In chapter 1130, we were introduced to the idea of a legendary devil fruit that has been passed down Elbaf's royal family, and that Loki, Elbaf's shameful prince, killed his own father purely out of his desire to possess this devil fruit. Of course, this lore-filled information sparked off speculations amongst the fanbase like wildfire, and understandably so, with Elbaf being one of the oldest civilizations in One Piece history that we know of. Its citizens, all fearsome giants. If they are calling a devil fruit legendary, you best believe this fruit is on another scale. And when it was initially revealed that Loki killed his father Harold because of his desperate desire for a legendary devil fruit, I originally assumed that Harold was the user of the fruit and that Loki obtained the fruit by killing Harold. I mean, we have seen Blackbeard do this with Whitebeard after all. And as I explained in another video of mine, even if you, like me, initially believed in Loki's innocence, the clues presented at the time did suggest that Loki did in fact consume this legendary devil fruit, even if he didn't necessarily kill Harold in cold blood for it. For example, like me, you could have assumed that he was forced to eat this devil fruit so that it wouldn't get stolen, so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Maybe he ate it because Harold asked him to, or maybe he simply did it because he needed to defeat an evil Harold, one that was too strong for him to battle. After all, we have seen Loki shackled in sea stone cuffs. We've seen that he is significantly weakened by the effects that the sea stones are having on him. That's why he couldn't fight back against the Holy Knights when they attacked him personally, and that's why he's close to almost begging Harroden to remove the sea stones so that he can join in on the fight in the Sun Realm to go and save Elbaf. Things that would only make sense if he has a devil fruit power. And so putting 2 and 2 together, it was natural to assume that Loki must have consumed the legendary devil fruit, even if he didn't kill his own father in cold blood just for those legendary powers. Resulting in the question of, what then could this legendary devil fruit be? Except, of course, now that we've received new information via the Elbaf flashback, it's become clearer and clearer what really happened on the day that Loki so-called claimed Elbaf's prized devil fruit for himself. First of all, the appearance of the devil fruit in the treasure chest means that we can definitely throw out the assumption that Harold was the user of the fruit. Not to mention that we also see Harold in water catching a shark with his bare hands with no signs of being weakened by the water, so this further suggests that at least that point in time, Harold didn't have any devil fruit abilities. And chapter 1152 also essentially confirms that someone else, and not Loki, stole the legendary devil fruit. And in that case, we can probably confidently speculate on what that legendary devil fruit, the one that has been passed down Elbaf's family, what that is. The Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, the legendary mythical Zoan devil fruit that grants its user the powers of the sun god, a sun god we know Elbaf worships and reveres. After all, the timeline makes perfect sense. 14 years ago, King Harold was killed by his own royal guard. Loki and Yrul were called to the palace only to find the king being stabbed while the Elbafian devil fruit went missing 14 years ago. Well, it just so happens that it was only 1 year afterwards, 13 years ago, that Shanks stole the Nika devil fruit from the world government, keeping it safely stored for about a year before Luffy mistakenly came into possession of its almighty powers 12 years ago. And knowing that Shanks also happened to be present at Elbaf Elbaf on the day of Harold's murder, even appearing at the scene of the crime? Well, now all clues point to the fact that the legendary devil fruit that has been in Elbaf's possession for centuries, that is none other than the legendary mythical Zoan Nika devil fruit, only for this fruit to have been stolen, most likely by the world government, from the hands of Elbaf, and then by Shanks, and eventually fatefully finding its way to Luffy, the one deemed by the Zoan devil fruit to be worthy of its extraordinary abilities. But let's just sidebar for a second, because I actually have a question for everybody. So the consensus is that Shanks stole the devil fruit from the Cypherpole agents 13 years ago. But interestingly, when I went back to reread chapter 1017, which is when Who's Who first revealed the details of that fateful day, well, back then, Who's Who says that it happened 12 years ago. And then it gets even weirder because I checked out the colored One Piece site, which supposedly waits to color all the pages until after the official Viz volumes come out, because that's when the corrections happen. And in that version, in one panel, they've corrected Who's Who's dialogue to state 13 years ago, but then in another panel, it still states 12 years ago. Whereas in the Viz official translation, it says 12 years ago in both cases. So what's going on? I mean, is this some sort of Mandela effect? Why does everyone, including the One Piece wiki, claim that Shanks stole the fruit 13 years ago when Who's Who claims that it happened 12 years ago? And I do think that the inconsistency could be because of maths. I mean, we know that Luffy eating the devil fruit had to have happened 12 years ago because chapter 1 says 10 years had passed between that day to when Luffy's journey at sea begins. And then we also have to add another 2 years because of the time skip, so that's 12 years. So then are we just adding one more year because we know that Shanks and the Redhead Pirates had been docked at Fuchsia Village for about a year by the time that Luffy eats the devil fruit? And is that why we then agree that Shanks must have stolen the devil fruit 13 years ago, despite what the chapter says? Because I've also tried to see whether Oda has released any statement about correcting any sort of potential timeline inconsistency, but I haven't found anything. So yeah, I thought that was odd, and if you know something, please do let me know by leaving a comment below. In the meantime, moving on, if Elbaf really did have possession of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, this then raises a whole lot of new implications for Loki. Because if that legendary devil fruit was the Nika devil fruit, then what is the devil fruit that Loki has consumed? And why does he still claim to be the sun god? Prior to the flashback that confirmed all of this, or heavily suggested at all of this, there were lots of speculations around what Loki's devil fruit could be, and I do think that is now again very relevant. Although mind you, a lot of the guesses around that time centered around powers that could be relevant to the sun god, or as to why Loki would call himself a sun god, so many of them involved fire, whereas now I don't think we have to be as limited to fruits that can be linked to the sun god, to those considerations, if we know that the fruit of Elbaf and the fruit of Loki's are entirely different. So then, thinking of other legendary devil fruit abilities, one of the most popular takes is that Loki's fruit is based on Fenrir, the monstrous wolf from Norse mythology. In fact, many of the speculations actually do make connections back to ancient Norse mythology, and understandably so. I mean, after all, Loki is named after the Norse god of mischief, and Elbaf as a whole has been obviously very much influenced by Norse mythology. Well, I have to say that Fenrir in particular is very significant. As I said, it's known to be a monstrous wolf. It's actually also one of Loki's various children according to the Norse myths, and Fenrir is said to be heavily involved in the Ragnarok, a beast so dangerous that the other gods feared its very existence. In fact, Fenrir was bound and tied up due to the gods' fears over the prophecies of the trouble that this wolf would bring, including Fenrir being responsible for Odin's death. And doesn't that just sound too familiar? Odin, also known as the All-Father of Norse mythology, a beast that is prophesied to kill the All-Father, and as a result, bound, chained up by the gods. And then there's a whole Tyr side of the story as well, because in order to try and bind Fenrir, the god had to trick him, and it was Tyr who sacrificed his arm as a part of that bargain. And fans have long pointed out the parallels between Shanks and Tyr. In fact, I made a video on it years and years ago, well before the Elbaf arc, and I do recommend you check out that video for more details on the whole Tyr story, because it is very fascinating. But especially now that we know of Shanks' involvement at Elbaf, this Fenrir theory definitely has legs. Not to mention how in chapter 1139 we see claw marks ripped through Elbaf's royal castle, scratches that look like they were made by a monster with very sharp claws. If Loki had a mythical Zoan devil fruit tied to a primal, chaotic wolf, one rooted in fate, this would fit perfectly. And then in addition to all of this, fans have also pointed out that in the One Piece Color Walk number 4, we see the monster trio alongside a massive wolf, a giant wolf with purple hair, very much like the color of Loki's hair according to the volume cover of volume 111. So I think we can all agree that the connections are definitely there. Another potential devil fruit idea that I haven't seen come up as often but is still very compelling is the Jormungand, the world serpent. Like Fenrir, the Jormungand is one of Loki's children in Norse mythology, one that is also very much linked to the Ragnarok. This is a serpent so large that it wraps around the entire world, and it's prophesied that when it releases its tail from its mouth, that will signify the heralding of the Ragnarok. And it's also prophesied that the Jormungand will fight and kill Thor during that epic war. Loki having a devil fruit based on the Jormungand would very well fit with the themes of danger and prophecy, which are all very much part of Loki's characterization already. And in addition, this version of Loki wouldn't just be a savage beast, but a coiled threat. Someone waiting beneath the surface, hidden but always present. Sort of like how Loki has been biding his time up till now. It would also tie in beautifully into all the serpent symbolism we've seen across One Piece, especially with the serpent of fire that's been talked about in the Harley, because we do see a serpent being in the mural of the first world, and it would be particularly interesting if Loki actually symbolized this serpent, or if Loki is supposed to be the counter to fight this serpent. Not to mention that the Jormungand already seems to exist as a concept in Elbaf, what with Dory and Broggy mentioning it all the way back in the Little Garden arc, or at least sort of, because at the end of the Little Garden arc, these two Elbafians mention a snake soaked in blood, and back then it wasn't really clear what they were referring to. I suppose it sort of seemed like it was a poetic metaphor, but then more recently in chapter 1153, we see King Harold also referred to this blood-soaked serpent, and in this context, it's pretty clear that King Harold is referring to the Red Line, which then very much matches up to fan theories that the Red Line is a terraformed wild world serpent, but that's another discussion for another time. And by the way, you can actually check out another one of my videos where I do discuss that in greater detail. But given Elbafians already have some beliefs about the Red Line being this fiery snake, it's possible that this could be very well embedded into Loki's design, or more specifically into his devil fruit design, especially given that Loki is a figure who has himself promised to bring about the end of the world. Jormungandr as being a symbol within Norse mythology that represents the beginning of the Ragnarok, i.e. a cataclysmic war that will bring about world destruction. That one line alone really mirrors the Jormungand. Plus, if Loki does have the Jormungand devil fruit, it would also fit with his character design, most notably his strange eyes, which are a key part of his design, which I know doesn't quite make sense because he's obviously had those eyes even before he would have obtained his devil fruit. But there are many characters in One Piece where their devil fruits just coincidentally happen to match their characteristics. But I have to say that the serpent doesn't really address the claw marks at the palace, unless we suppose that the serpent is more like a dragon serpent. Otherwise, other Norse mythology themed devil fruits that could also account for the claw marks is the unnamed eagle that sits atop the Yggdrasil, the world tree, and this eagle is supposed to represent wisdom, the balance of life and death, and the pursuit of knowledge, which are all themes I can see being relevant to Loki's story, especially as it gets unfolded further, as well as the hawk that is said to rest beyond that eagle's brows, and this hawk is known as the Veithfulnir. The Veithfulnir is symbolic of being a keen observer to the world, which could be relevant in terms of Loki being being aware of what really happened to Harold, being aware of the Elbafian mystery. But in any case, it's obvious that both these birds of prey would have very, very sharp claws. I have also seen some other ideas about how Loki's devil fruit could be something that allows him to change his size, and I suppose this links to how Loki in Norse mythology is known to be a shapeshifter. But for practicality reasons, it also seems to be a way for fans to claim that Loki could make himself small enough to fit on the Sunny, especially for those who want to see Loki become the next Straw Hat. Others believe that he might have eaten a replica or a copy of the real Nika devil fruit, similar to how Momonosuke received a synthetic version of Kaido's dragon devil fruit, and that could be why Loki declares himself to be the sun god, even though we know Luffy has the Nika devil fruit. And to be fair, any of these potential devil fruit ideas could work. They're all creative, deeply rooted in lore, and they would all certainly be very, very exciting to see. But I have to say that I've also had another thought. What if Loki never had a devil fruit to begin with? Or at least, what if Loki has only been pretending to have consumed the sun god Nika all this time? Wouldn't that make his story even more tragic, just more poetic? It's clear that the Elbafians believe that he's eaten Elbaf's legendary devil fruit, but assuming that they don't know what that devil fruit exactly is, what if Loki has just been letting them believe all the horrible things about him for their own good? I mean, it's clear that Loki is the victim of some wider conspiracy, and it's clear that even though Loki knows the truth of what really happened, he's been keeping that silent at his own expense. He's been locked up in the underworld for 6 years, even though he says himself that he didn't choose this fate and that he would rather be free. And yet imagine if Loki said this line, "No man chooses to be chained," whereas in reality Loki could actually choose to be free, and yet he doesn't for Elbaf's sake. When Scopper decides it's finally time to tell the truth to Haruden, Loki almost seems to beg Scopper to stay silent. It's as if he wants the Elbafians to keep believing what they want to believe about him. And I think that it all has to do with Loki wanting to preserve his father's memory and the king's legacy. Maybe Harold told Loki, "You need to be the symbol of the sun god." Whether Nika is the liberator or the destroyer, Elbaf needs to believe in a sun god. And so that's the role that Loki has been trying to play for the past 14 years. And all the while, the Elbafians have cursed him, feared him, hated him, not knowing that the reason why Elbaf has been able to stay safe, has been potentially protected from external threats, despite not having a king for 14 years, despite having transformed and reversed its warrior lifestyle, is because Loki was protecting it secretly from the outside, pretending to have fled Elbaf, whereas in reality he was keeping close, making sure no harm came to it, up until 6 years ago when Shanks captured him. And perhaps that's when Shanks took over protecting Elbaf instead. Or maybe it's because Loki knows that King Harold messed up. Even if he didn't mean to, maybe the king made a deal with the world government that made Elbaf vulnerable. Or who knows, maybe Loki knew that if the Elbafians found out that the legendary devil fruit, the one that the proud warrior kingdom has been entrusted to keep safe for centuries, if that fruit was stolen, he knew that this would devastate Elbaf, a culture that is so deeply rooted in its traditions and its proud history. Perhaps it would even result in Elbaf reversing its newfound traditions, its new transformation, and they would decide to go to war to reclaim its treasured prize. Something that they can't really afford to do, what with their king dead, you rule an elderly man well past his prime. And up until very recently, both Dory and Broggy lost to the world. For whatever reason it is, Loki has chosen to take the blame, just like he has all throughout his life. We were told that Loki made the underworld his playground, killed and tamed vicious beasts, and then unleashed them on villagers, committed arson, pulled dangerous pranks, made people's lives a living hell. But here's the thing, it was also mentioned that Loki committed these crimes always whilst the king was away. And that detail seems key, because chapter 1136 also revealed something critical. Agents had been sent to Elbaf, possibly leaking inside information to to the world government for some time now. And with Mother Carmel's operations being previously based in Elbaf, we can presume that the world government has been discreetly keeping tabs on Elbaf for a lot longer than we realize. And so all of those attacks that Loki has been blamed for, those could have all been attacks by a world government agent causing disturbances to Elbaf whilst their king was away to disrupt their political stability. Maybe to sow discord amongst the citizens so that Elbaf wouldn't have a worthy, trusted heir. Imagine if in reality Loki was actually stopping the beasts, not unleashing them. If he was trying to put out fires, not cause them. And look, even if that isn't the case, even if Loki is actually responsible for all the things he's said to have caused, we already know enough about what Loki has had to endure to know that he may have grown up wanting to act out. Very much like Naruto, who also pulled a lot of pranks just for some attention, just for some love. But I also think a misunderstanding on this scale would be very much in line with how Oda drops major reveals to flip us on our heads, completely reframing Loki's relationship with Elbaf to give us another classic, tragic One Piece hero. And of course, this could still all work even if Loki does have a devil fruit. It could be any of the ones that we discussed earlier or something else entirely. I feel like at this point, Oda has teased us with the idea of a legendary devil fruit of his own, even if Loki doesn't have the Nika devil fruit that has been passed down the Elbaf royal line. But I do also really like toying with this idea that Loki is this entirely fruitless martyr. But of course, as always, what do you think? Do you think Loki has a devil fruit? If so, what devil fruit do you think he has? Or have you been convinced that Loki may have just been pretending all of this time, all the while doing so for Elbaf's sake? Let me know by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed today's discussion. Please also do subscribe for more One Piece discussions, but also to help out a fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it. You can also help out the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.